Hello everybody, welcome back to Bombshell. I have to apologize for the fact that I literally said in episode 1, I am going to film and upload this every Monday, and of course today is Tuesday, but I was casting the AIM Lab Skills Challenge yesterday, so I think I get some forgiveness. Today I have a couple of topics that I am really excited to discuss with you guys. I really want to start off with Evil Geniuses, which might seem like a little bit of a random choice for a topic, given the fact that Evil Geniuses are one of the teams that got eliminated from VCT NA this week. But to be honest with you, that's kind of the main reason that I really want to speak about them. They came in 6th place, just behind 100 Thieves, who have also been eliminated. Who saw that one coming? But the big thing with Evil Geniuses for me is the question of, are they going to get better? What are the problems with this team? What have they been doing wrong? Is there still potential for them? Because when you look at the roster of Evil Geniuses, they've been around for a little while together. They did all of the qualifiers together, whereas, you know, you compare that to a team like 100 Thieves, who seem to be having an identity crisis right now. And EG have just really struggled in VCT NA this week, this stage. They've lost every single one of their stage 1 games. As I say, they're now eliminated for playoff contention. But in my opinion, they seem to have had something of a steady improvement throughout the course of the stage. Their first game versus Exet, first game they played for VCT, it was an 0-2 game where they lost 13-9 and 13-7. And that, to me, I think is the worst of the games and the matches that they played throughout the course of this stage. The very strange thing about Evil Geniuses for me is the fact they basically blitzed their way through the open qualifiers. They had a really good run in both Open Quals 1 and Open Quals 2. So they look to be existing in this strange limbo between good enough and not quite good enough. And that's a very strange place to be, because it suggests that I wouldn't be surprised if this team also qualifies to come back in stage 2. They're going to have to go through all the qualifiers and prove themselves once again, but they have shown themselves up against a lot of the teams that are in this tier that is just below them. Now, the first thing that I wanted to discuss with them is the instance, or rather the topic of their map picks and bans, because a lot of teams obviously have a very characteristic way of going about this. Many of them have perma bans, many of them have perma picks, if they can possibly get away with it. Evil Geniuses do definitely have a perma ban. They ban Fracture as their first ban for everything. But other than that, they've actually had a pretty wide variety of maps that they have played throughout the course of VCT NA. And actually, in the 4 weeks of the regular season, Evil Geniuses have played picked a different map in their map ban every single time. Now, the thing that kind of concerns me about their map pool is that at this point in the competitive cycle, it feels like teams really should have at least one of Fracture and Breeze down. But if we have a look at the statistics for this team and their just map selection, since the very start of February, which is when the current like VCT circuit started, they have a very good record on split. They've got a 100% win rate on split for all the games that they've played. Then it precipitously drops down to 67% for the next map. But if you have a look at Fracture and Breeze, well, they haven't played Fracture at all. They've been permabanning it, and Breeze is just sat there at 40%. And I feel like this is a bit of a problem for this team, because most teams you see at the moment are going to at least be good at one of them. And Breeze especially is a map that there has been a vast growth, in my opinion, of the way that teams play this map, especially after Cloud9 started kind of pioneering the KO style on Breeze from Champions. A lot more teams have been picking up KO and using him on that map and really starting to get to grips with it, whereas previously they really didn't like that map. And of course, there are a lot of teams who have really been gunning for Fracture. Evil Geniuses don't seem to be one of those teams. And it's almost ironic, actually, because the one map that they beat Cloud9 on was, in fact, Breeze. So I think that's something that I would like to see from them in the future, is start to pick up one of those maps. Clearly, Fracture seems to be the one that they are the most uncomfortable on. It could just be a case of the fact that their opponents have been banning out Breeze, but I think it's something that would do them very well to start really reining into their map pool. But there were a number of issues that I think that Evil Geniuses have faced over the course of this stage. I mean, the big one, of course, is that Evil Geniuses seem to really struggle with rounds that work against their economic favor. So whether that's the opening pistol round of a half, whether they've got an eco round, whether you're going into round 3 and they're the ones who are playing on the anti-eco and they're going against the full gun round, and, you know, or any round where they have a partial buy, really, that seems to not be a very comfortable place for EG. And I don't really need to explain to anyone, I don't think, why it's particularly important to be able to play eco rounds well, because of course the momentum that you can gain off the back of winning an eco round is just monumental. And especially when you're getting into those rounds that are towards the end of a half, towards the end of a map, winning an eco can be the difference between winning and losing the next few rounds, which then give you a win or a loss on the map. In fact, this week when they played against the Guard, the only pistol round that they managed to successfully win was round 13 on Icebox, but even then they actually ended up losing the subsequent round to the Guard. So that's a bit of a rough spot for EG, and I would definitely like to see some improvement with them there. I think if we're focusing specifically on this series that they had against the Guard, because obviously we're focusing on what's happened in Valorant in the past week, there were a couple other issues that stuck out to me in that series in particular. The first being EG's retakes looked a little bit weak against the Guard's post-plant positioning, and this is mostly in the context of Haven, which was the first map that they played against them. I think that the Guard have very strong post-plant positioning. It's something that I've spoken about before on my channel, but sometimes it just looked like Evil Geniuses were kind of funneling themselves into a site, not necessarily with a really well preconceived idea, plan, or really good utility usage that we oftentimes see from other teams, one of which this week that we saw do excellent use of utility to be able to break down a post-plant position was Cloud9 when they were playing on Haven. So I think that's something that needs to be improved upon for EG. That said, there was one really kind of good thing that I spotted about EG on their Haven game, and I do want to be giving them credit where it's due. And that is, so I'll phrase it as the issue at first. The Guard were very good at being able to spot holes in EG's defense and then just be able to kind of waltz through that and use that as their weak spot to exploit. Obviously, Haven being quite a big map, and you find the same issue on Breeze at times, is that it's a lot harder to cover all of the space that you might need as a defending team because there is so much space. So it makes sense that that would be something that a team might find hard. However, on rounds where EG didn't give up space early in their defense, it actually threw the Guard off quite a bit, and that's something I would like to see them grow on. There was, I think it was on round 4 of Haven, the opening from the Guard was they used the shock dart into Garage, get rid of the alarm bot, but actually there was no wavering in the defense from Evil Geniuses, and as a result, the Guard sort of looked a little bit like they hadn't been able to open anything up, which previously EG had been able to give them. So I think that looking at those kinds of positives and something they can build on as well is a really strong thing. We shouldn't just be focusing on the negatives. So yeah, I mean, that was really good. I mean, obviously there was some really good individual play. First clutch that he had on round 16 of Haven is something that was all over social media, all over Reddit. But I have to say, one thing I definitely noticed from watching this weekend of VCTNA is, oh my god, there was more than one team who forgot to like clear or check top sewer when making an A-long push onto the A side. And this was actually an example of that. So even though Fur got that really good clutch at the end, and I massively commend him for it, that clutch wouldn't have been needed if Valen had have been cleared out from that space on top sewer. And yeah, I saw that in a couple of games. I wish I could remember what the other instances of it were so that I could just mention it offhand right now. But Yeah, it's a little bit frustrating to have seen that happen a couple of times. And I mean, I think it's great that the EG were able to get the clutch. And one thing that I will give massive commendation to EG for is the fact that their players as individuals have exceptional skill. I mean, obviously your boy Dre is really a fan favorite. He always overperforms on Sova, or you know, I'm going to say that and someone's going to pull up some bad stats of his, but I think that he's a fantastic player. Fur proved that in this round in particular. So I think that there's so much great individual skill and potential on this team. It's just sometimes the combining it all together does not necessarily come to a total that exceeds the sum of their parts. I think if we look over onto Icebox, which was the second map of that series, one of the really big things that I noticed was that mid control was a huge factor in the outcome of the round. So when the Guard were on defense, they would use this very annoying, albeit creative Viper wall across green that would actually cut off mid. And it basically meant for the attackers, it's exceptionally risky to try and push either of the non-A lanes. So you would see a lot of A pushes. And that was quite hard for evil geniuses to be able to exploit. However, there were times where evil geniuses, and especially on the rounds where the Guard weren't using this wall, evil geniuses would really like hard focus mid, and they would send Reformed up there. There was a round where he got actually a really good play into B off the back of that. But sometimes that would be at the detriment of particularly A. And actually, if we were to look at round 6 from that map, it was really frustrating because they have this really good mid presence. They're pushing their way up, but they actually don't have anyone on the flank watch of A. And that's something that the Guard can exploit really easily. But that said, back in round 8, you know, 2 rounds later, it's something that evil geniuses actually adapted pretty well off, because they then sent their chamber to go and take that flank watch mantle. He places down the trademarks. He's got quite a far forward positioning in A to start the round, and he can hold that flank a little bit later on. So I think that the way that mid was being played in Icebox was pretty influential for both of these teams. But I think again, there is always that risk with some of those rounds from EG, that them focusing on mid meant that they weren't focusing something elsewhere, and the Guard were able to exploit that gap that they had left in this case, their attack. Now, the one real big concern that I had from EG on Icebox was the last few rounds felt a little bit desperate. And they kept repeating this green-yellow defense, really aggressive green defense that was just getting bulldozed by the Guard every single time. And this would be like Reformed and Georgiamo, for example, and they would be either like both held really far up on green, or you'd have one at yellow, one at green. And it just meant that if it didn't go well for them, that B defense is basically over, because you can't trade both of them. I mean, even whichever round it was where one of them got killed, and I think Georgiamo got killed because he was holding a little bit further up, and then Reformed is left on yellow, just defending himself. And then the B side is totally open, and especially if you're losing your Viper very early, you know, a lot of teams like to play their Viper's wall specifically for retake potential on the B side. And that was really frustrating to watch, because it felt like EG could have made those last few rounds harder for the Guard than they actually were, but constantly kind of banging their heads against the wall and repeating that one way of playing the like a green defense, I just found very peculiar. Like, sure, try it once, and if it fucks up, then it fucks up. But for me, it was the fact that they kept doing it, and that was a shame, because yeah, considering the fact they've been able to make adaptations in other parts of the game, and this kept happening, like, for me, that was such a letdown at the end of the game. So that's the interesting thing with EG, is they come with some pretty good ideas, and there are just gaps in them at times. I think they have excellent individual skill, but the way that they combine that isn't always at its optimal. Now, obviously, as I mentioned, EG are going to have to qualify for stage 2 in their own right again. And I can see that, you know, actually working. I can see them making it back into VCT. I think for them, it's about finding that next step to be able to jump up, especially when you consider the outcome of their group. The next team up was 100 Thieves, and a lot of the problems with 100 Thieves just come from the fact that they're constantly changing, and there's all these things that are being played differently. And Luminosity, the next team up from that, you know, already we're looking at quite a jump. That's the difference between coming last in your group and actually qualifying for playoffs. So it really felt like there was a bit of a mess in Group 1 in VCT NA this stage. But I'm going to be keeping quite a keen eye on EG. I think that they're a team that is, you know, they're a team who you can get yourself invested in. I find these players really interesting, but I think the optimist in me is saying that a number of these issues that were apparent, at least in this series, are issues that can probably be patched relatively well. You know, they're not really deep fundamental problems that are going to massively disrupt like the future of evil geniuses. They're just ones that, you know, with scrims, with VOD review, should be able to be fixed. And I think there's a lot of potential with this team. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was, unfortunately, I actually had a clip for this, and I wanted to show the clip because I don't want to just necessarily like have to transcribe it, but unfortunately the clip has been deleted, and this clip is not even 24 no god, was it 24 hours old? It was from 100, it was right after 100 Thieves game, and this was a clip from Nadeshot on his channel, because he's been doing the watch parties, obviously watching along with 100 Thieves if they've been playing, and naturally he was not very happy with the way that 100 Thieves game against Exet went this weekend. 100 Thieves needed to win that game to stay in, to have some hope, some vestige of hope of playoff contention, and they lost the series. So of course they have been disqualified, will not be in playoffs, and for a team that had a bye into VCT NA this stage is a huge loss. And someone sent me this clip, and it was Nadeshot basically talking about how he was like, you guys know, you know me, you know what my goals are, you know how much we want to fucking win. Like, obviously this is hugely disappointed, and what I want is for my team to win. And he was talking about how they'd obviously had these hard times, they've made the roster changes. He starts talking about Bang and JC Stani, and he's like, absolutely cracked players, insane. Like, I'm so grateful that they stepped up and they came and played for us, have really great futures ahead of them, blah 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 blah. And the way that this whole clip is like delivered and worded, you're quite kind of left thinking at the end, is he about to replace them? Is he about to blow up this roster again? And I mean, obviously, I don't know. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. I don't know. But it's just the way it was worded was very like, this isn't working. These guys, you know, like when orgs drop a player and they make their little Twitter graphic and they like post it online, and it's like, thank you so much for your service to this team, or however the fuck they word it. A little bit less militaristically, I guess, but it had that vibe to it. And honestly, so this person sent it to me, my friend sent it to me, and they were like, why do I feel like he's about to drop them both? And oh my god, I wish I could show you guys the clip, because this is gonna be, I believe, Nadeshot. Like, Nadeshot is definitely that kind of person who's gonna run his team specifically for the purpose of fucking winning. Like, you know, Nadeshot himself is one of the most prolific ex-pros in the entire scene. And that's what 100 Thieves won. You know, there were some memes that I saw online that were like, about Nadeshot, it's gonna just keep Hiko, get rid of everybody else again. But I'm a little bit nervous for those players. And I'm intrigued to see what's gonna happen with that, because obviously, I don't know, I really hope he doesn't blow up the roster again. I've spoken extensively about this on my channel now, that I would not be in favor of that, but I don't run the team, and that clip was something. The last thing that I really wanted to talk about was OpTic playing Neon on Haven against version 1. Now, already straight away, I'm going to put it out there that for me, the OpTic versus V1 series was the most entertaining series of the weekend. I was actually talking to someone while the series was on and they were working, and I was like, if you rewatch anything from this weekend, go back and watch this series, because OpTic obliterating V1 on V1's own map. Bear in mind that V1 have been an incredibly dominant force in VCT NA up until this point. It's not like there's some fucking mid-tier team. Like, V1 is a top-tier team, and OpTic just absolutely, like, fucking them was insane. So Ascent, really something. We move on to Haven, and they fucking lock in Neon. What? I mean, we've only seen her a tiny bit in pro play, but not really. And OpTic are a team that have had a very consistent like lineup. They've had a very consistent comp that they use specifically on this map in recent history. So like, what, they've got to have something like really juicy planned. And to be honest with you, straight out the gate, we saw why. Like, we saw exactly how juicy their plan was. However, the really interesting thing about this choice to bring Neon is after a little while it stopped working, and this insane momentum that OpTic had for the first 50% of the overall series just shifted. It was like day and night. And from then on, this was V1's game, even when we're looking over into map 3. But I wanted to have a look at some of my thoughts that I had about Neon. So the really big obvious thing at the start was she's a massive utility sink and disruptor on the A side. So what we would see is V1 would play what is a pretty common defensive strategy for the A lobby, and that is to fault line in through A link and use a grav well on A lobby. And then the idea is that you can kind of play at the end of A long. But the thing with Neon's dash is, or her speed thing, is that she could circumvent that. Like, she would just run straight over it and be in A long. And we're looking at it like, oh, she really just did that. And it was nuts. And so they could have just such a strong push onto A, or really disrupt that, rotate out, go more over towards mid, over towards C, have these really fast rotates. Like, it was all Envy's, OpTic's oh my god, I'm never ever gonna get out of that habit of calling them Envy. My bad. Even in my notes I call them Envy. Like, I just write Envy and then I'm like, it's like with Neon, I have to actively think about calling her Neon, because I always call her Zeri, which is the League of Legends champion that's like the same fucking person. Like, to me, she's like, Zeri just rolls off the tongue better. Anyway, regardless. But even when V1 started to use, you know, they had Zelsis, who is pushed very up close to the top of A long. He's playing Sky. Even when they used the Hawk to try and counter that, it just didn't really make much of a difference. There were a number of attempts to counter her. For example, when they decided to make a C site engage using the fast lane to actually push down C long, you know, perfect use of the fast lane, by the way. And version 1 would like use a Rolling Thunder from CT and still didn't win the round, because what would happen is Envy, OpTic, who have like popped their overdrive wanting to push into C, they decided to play it a bit patiently, wait for the stun from the Rolling Thunder to actually wear off, but then do double peaks when they actually pushed out the end of C long. So where V1 had situated their positions in the C site to try and catch out OpTic as they're pushing through this choke point, OpTic are already thinking one step ahead. Now, obviously, that in and of itself has nothing to do with Neon, but it is a perfect example of how their coordination with each other and just really good game sense, the way that they play, still meant that what would seem direct counter to Neon was actually just not good enough to prevent their push from working. However, I think a lot of when the tables started to turn came in where, for me, Zelsis actually started to change his position. And So instead of playing at the top of A long, and using those hawks aggressively and really starting to, or trying to aggressively peek out onto an A-long push from OpTic, they actually started to play like for an A-site retake in a way. So he would be positioned way further back in the map, you know, whether he's positioned up in like A link, connector, or even on the B site. You know, there was a round where we saw him actually, it was round 9, where we saw him actually push down into mid, get the opening kill, start to retreat, and great, you've got the opening kill, it hasn't been traded, and now if you want to focus on the A site, you can do that. So what it kind of meant is that what Neon was achieving at the beginning of this this map actually wasn't kind of like doing anything, because she was pushing through, and like against whom? Like what was she getting from it? Not really that much. Like, yeah, sure, maybe you can still get the orb, and I understand playing to deny the orb to the enemy team, but when it came to actually winning the rounds a little bit later on down the line, V1 were much better prepared to actually play for a retake on the space that they'd given up, rather than trying to defend it aggressively from the get-go, and that started to work really well for them. I think also it became a little bit apparent that because the rotates could be very fast using the Neon, that could be split. So a perfect example of this for me was round 10, where we had the fast lane being used on C long, Neon's going to push that way, everyone else coming in through garage. Now this time, instead of the Rolling Thunder being used down C long, like the example I gave just earlier, they used the Rolling Thunder into the garage connector. And what that means is that half of the team who are looking to push that way can't actually get onto the C site at the same time as the Neon can. So they're all out of sync with each other, and suddenly that doesn't work anymore. And that became a lot better an approach for version 1 than what we saw with the original attempt to Rolling Thunder everybody when they were all pushing in from C, because those opportunities to be able to work together actually are taken away, and OpTic's positions can be taken advantage of a lot better from V1. And then when we got over onto the defensive half, it became very apparent that, you know, this Neon was just far less useful on defense, which I think is something that maybe, you know, intuition could perhaps tell you. Her utility is, especially with her speed and things, probably give away the idea that maybe she is better at making these big engagements and bypassing a lot of this utility like we saw at the beginning of the map. But you couldn't help but feel like OpTic's usual composition, which consists of Astrojet, Killjoy, Skye, and Sova, would have perhaps been a bit more useful on the defense, where they actually took no rounds, and version 1 ended up winning the map. And actually, it was a 13-5, if I remember correctly. So ultimately, despite the Neon looking incredibly impressive at the very start of the map, it didn't actually end up meaning that much. So my big question there is, are they going to do it again? Like, was it a surprise pick that they had been scrimming, or they'd been practicing and really just planned for this game specifically? Because this was going to be their difficult game, right? Version 1, arguably the biggest rival to OpTic in their group. So was this something they just wanted to spring on them, and now they're going to give it up because it didn't actually ended up working in practice? Or is this something that they're going to build on and potentially try and grow that use of Neon for it to be a niche pick for them? I don't know where the value for that, in terms of like the return on investment for how much they'd have to put into practicing it and really planning around that is, or if they just want to toss that away. Because especially as we've seen with the performance of OpTic of late, a lot of the way they play has been exceptionally impressive and doesn't necessarily need big changes. So I wouldn't be surprised if we just don't see that again. Unless they can really come up with something creative that's going to make up for the problems that became apparent with playing Neon in this game. Either way, I thought that was super fascinating. I love it when teams bring out something unique, something creative. I think it's way more interesting than watching teams do the same fucking thing every single time. So I loved that. I'm super interested to know what you guys' thoughts. Do you think that EG have the capability to come back? Do you think they need to make changes? Or do you think that it's all about just clearing up those tiny little like strategic differences and how they actually execute in game? Because I'm very curious about watching this team. What are your thoughts on Nadeshot? If any of you saw that clip, please tell me, because I promise I didn't make it up. But it was, I would just love to know how people, like, are people just like, what is that meme that's like the old like British woman who's just like, oh, not again, fucking out, like what? Someone will know what I'm talking about. And yeah, Neon, let me know if you think we're going to see more Neon. Maybe it's going to be another team who took inspiration, decides they want to implement that. But honestly, given OpTic's performance on that map in terms of round count, I don't know how many teams are going to be in a rush to pick it up. But I definitely would like to see Neon be implemented more in the future, just for variety. And I mean, think back to when KO first got into competitive play. There were teams that tried him, didn't really work. This was back when teams were really trying to use him almost as a secondary duelist rather than the way that he's played now. And it's taken a little while, and certain teams like fucking him up, and he's not really making a lot of a splash for them, for teams to actually get to this point where they realize he's incredibly useful and really, really great to implement into their composition. So Team Neon for the future, I guess. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you on next week's episode. Goodbye.